So, once more, doing some fact checking with our friend, as he likes to put it, European lore and his usual racist antics. And this is a pretty bad one, but I actually do agree with at least one part of this video. About 80% of it was worthless and actually misleading, but I do think he touched on one legitimate point, which is, I think, something where Sandman fans are converging on. But some people are comfortable with the changes with Sandman now that it's being adapted by Netflix. I'm still a little bit torn on what to think about it. I've addressed this issue in full in another video. I will put a link to that. I've also done a review of Sandman. I will do some reviews here, but if you want more in-depth breakdowns, that is on the Cooper channel. Okay, with the shilling out of the way, what is the dilemma? Well, the main focus of the controversy keeps going back to Death being portrayed by a black woman, and that seems to have garnered a lot of hostility. Although there were a lot of changes to the other characters, but this one seems to be the one that obsessively people go back to. But I have my doubts that European lore knows what he speaks of. And I want to forewarn, I am a fan of Sandman, but I'm more intermediate. But even I knew some things, and he's definitely getting a lot of things wrong.
Be incorporated, and that no matter if the author of the original source material is involved or not. Now, in this case, we know that Neil Gaiman, the author of the original Sandman comic books that was published by Vertigo Comics from the end of the 1980s to I think the half of the 1990s, is involved, is the executive producer, I think, and he was also working on the script. Now, of course.
Well, to begin, Vertigo does not have much to do with it because Sandman came out years before Vertigo was even a thing. In fact, it was the success of Sandman that led to Vertigo. For those not in the know, what are we babbling about? Well, Vertigo essentially was an imprint to sort of house the more mature titles that DC was sponsoring. Essentially a part of the DC universe, which Sandman is a part of. A lot of people get that wrong too. So DC essentially was putting out more and more adult content, and they wanted a sort of group label to put things under to differentiate them from the more, whatever you want to call them, mainstream superhero titles. And Vertigo was what they fell back into. And the success of Sandman, Swamp Thing, and other sort of murky supernatural horror titles made them come up with the imprint. But Sandman's history is technically preceding all that. So if you actually bought the comic when it first came out, it didn't have anything to do with Vertigo. It didn't even have, even Sandman fans get that mixed up, but it's not true. Vertigo is kind of a separate thing from Sandman, but they are connected. But to say that Sandman is a Vertigo title is to show you really don't know Sandman. But now let's get to the more meaty aspect of what you came for.
And the waitress who served us was a kind of vision. She was American, had long black hair, was dressed entirely in black jeans, t-shirt, etc., and wore a big silver ankh on a silver necklace. And she looked exactly like Mike Dringerberg's drawing of death. Now, if you look at all these women from his description, they looked exactly like Death from the comic book, the original comic book. Now, if you look at the Death from the TV show, this couldn't be further from the source material. And if you then look at what Neil Gaiman tweeted a couple of years ago, he was indeed defending.
Well, there are two things to say. For one thing, that's a genetic fallacy. If you're just pointing out the origins of this or that character happens to be this or that white person or this or that American, well, that's fine, although European lore is not very consistent, because when it comes to Rings of Power in Numenor, he has problems with a black woman there too, even though Tolkien explicitly told us that Numenor is based on Egypt. Now, I think it would have been better and made more sense to hire an Egyptian actress or perhaps a MENA actress, because that would align more closely with his intentions. But seeing non-white people in Numenor is not something that's shocking. Now, does that justify Muriel? Maybe, maybe not. But if we are going to go down this route to appeal to the genetic origin of a character, it's kind of funny how he's very forgetful about the origin of other characters. So I'll just say that much. Also, we don't really know if this is even true. If, he had bothered to be truthful, he'd have told his audience that Sam Keith was the original artist of Sandman, not Mike. So again, A lot of the early conceptualizations of Sandman and key characters was not due to him. It's a long story of why Sam left the title. Basically, he and Neil kept coming to blows. There was no disrespect, it was just Sam didn't feel that he fit on Sandman. But that tweet is real, but I don't think it means what he thinks it does. For the simple reason that death is not a human being. So I take for granted Neil Gaiman is not a stupid person. I hope European lore doesn't think Neil Gaiman is a stupid person, because people have quoted that back to him, but there's no contradiction. It's true that with Batman, it might get hairy if you turn him into a Chinese woman. All of a sudden, you'd be like, wait, does this really align with the character that we know from the 1930s? Maybe, maybe not. But with Sandman and Death in particular, there is no issue because, good or bad, and again, I want to forewarn, I've only seen the first episode, and from that, you can definitely tell they've changed a huge amount. A lot of key details have definitely been changed. So I'm not defending everything that Neil approved of, but in terms of death, from all I know, the essential characteristics of the character, the key components, have not really been changed all that much. Now, I don't agree with the casting decisions, and I don't agree with a lot of the decisions in the Sandman show, but it's a cosmic being. It's not a human person. So even bring up the issue of gender or race swap is to demonstrate your complete stupidity. And that's fine if he wants to be a stupid racist person. But again, when we check the books, when we look at the canon carefully, Neil has answered this question that Death, as well as Morpheus and other key characters, are not human. They're cosmic beings. We're only seeing a kind of visualization of these beings. That's not really what they look like. That's just what they look like to us as human beings with sense perception. That's not really their genuine form. And Death herself has many different forms. She's been a Chinese woman. She's, yes, even been a black woman. So it's just demonstrating your ignorance of the canon of these works. Again, I get it, that's the popular decision, and I'm partly somewhat sympathetic because even though in principle a lot of these casting decisions are not a problem in terms of canon, I do think Neil has gone a little bit too far because he keeps altering, again, gender isn't the right word, but the visualization is much more, what do we want to call it, female or pro woman, or he's defaulting that the character should be a woman, even though in the books and in other media, the character is not a woman. To take only one case, Lucifer, again, based on his character, is usually a male, but now it's a female. It's Brienne of Tar for no reason. And the butler, again, it's a minor character, but was male and presented as male, but is now as a female. So in principle, these character changes can be done. There's no violation of the canon, but I do think Neil is, to put it mildly, going overboard, and I do think fans can be upset to some degree, but you want to be careful not to go too far. I do think he is playing fast and loose with the facts and saying that there's nothing that's being disrupted at all. I think that is a little bit more questionable. So it's a mostly worthless video by a worthless person, but I do agree that there's some funny stuff going on. Within that limited scope, I do think fans have reasons to complain.